Hey, so everyone, it's officially here. We've been waiting for it and it's arrived. And what's arrived, did I hear you say? And no, it's not that long lost Amazon package that you ordered a few weeks ago.
They're here.
It's a new version of Unraid. So yep, the guys from Limetech, they're here with Unraid 6.9. And so yeah, the digit in this release has gone up a whole number from a 0.8 to a 0.9. So this means this is a major release. So what exactly do I mean by that? Well, when a new Unraid version goes up, for example, let's take Unraid 6.8.2 to say 6.8.3, then in those releases we don't really expect to see any new features. Yeah, we may see things like a new kernel, etc. But the times when we see new features is when we go up a whole digit, like from Unraid 6.7 to 6.8, and now here we are with 6.9. Now at the moment, at the time when I'm making this video, this version isn't on the Unraid stable channel, but on the Unraid Next channel, because this version is still in beta. And because it's beta software, it's recommended that you only use it on test servers. Me personally, I run it on my home server. I always like to run the latest software available. I'm happy to risk that there might be any bugs, because at the end of the day, the worst that can happen for me on my home server is my family are just going to be angry because they have to read a book instead of watch a movie on MB or Plex. Okay, so with the warnings all out of the way, let's take a look and see what's new in Unraid 6.9. So to do that, we're going to go across onto a server that's running the latest stable version of Unraid. We'll have a look at everything there and then upgrade it to the newest beta version. Okay, so here we are on one of my test servers, and let's see which Linux kernel version this one's using. And here we can see it's using kernel version 4.19.107. So at present on this server I've got one disk in the array, a cache drive and a bunch of unassigned disks here. So let's go onto the settings page here and let's have a look at the Docker version that's being used on the latest stable version. We can see it's 19.03.5, and let's look at the VM manager here, and the libvirt version here is 5.10.0 and QEMU is 4.2.0. Okay, and so looking at network services, we've got AFP, which is the Apple File Sharing Protocol, NFS, SMB, an FTP server and a syslog server. So whilst talking about the different types of network services, I just want to have a quick look at my shares. I've got various shares here of three different types. I've got these shares here that are regular SMB shares, Windows shares. I've got one share here that's an NFS, Linux share, but I've got this one here called Old Apple, which is an AFP share, which is the Apple File Sharing Protocol. Now I'm showing you this for a reason, because in the Unraid 6.9, the Apple AFP service is no longer available. So after we've upgraded, we'll come back here and have a look. Okay, so let's move on and now let's have a look at the plugins tab. And before you upgrade to a new system, I always recommend that you update all of the plugins. So just come here and click check for updates. And we can see here there's an update for unassigned devices here. And the reason I like to update the plugins first is when a new version of Unraid comes out, there's often an update for the plugin, as you can see here, which is specific for the new version. So always update your plugins first. So I'm going to click on this button here, update all plugins, to get that all ready. Okay, that's done. So onto the Docker page here. Now updating your Docker containers before the upgrade is an optional step. It's not as important to do this as it is updating the plugins, but it's still nice just having everything up to date. Right, so moving on, let's have a quick look at the VMs tab. Now there's only one VM running on this server here, and there's nothing we need to do to it before upgrading the OS, but we will be coming back here after upgrading to make a little change. And we can skip past the apps tab. Community applications is going to be on the latest version because of just upgrading the plugins. So let's move on to the tools tab. And I'm just going to come across the system devices here. And here we can see all the hardware inside of this server. Now the reason I'm showing you this is because in the new Unraid all of this has changed massively. And we'll be coming back here later after the upgrade and seeing what's new. So let's download the new OS now. So let's go back to Tools and then click on Update OS. Now it says everything's up to date because I'm on the stable branch, but to install beta versions of Unraid we need to click here from stable onto next. And here we can see the latest version now is 6.9.0 beta22. Now, one thing to note before you upgrade, the release notes tell us that none of the out of tree drivers compile with this kernel. And if you're wondering what exactly out of tree is, it's basically that the code needed to compile these drivers lives outside of the source code of the Linux kernel. So these devices are dependent on the manufacturer to update their drivers to make them compatible. So if you need one of these drivers, then it's probably best not to update now, but if you do update, then later you find that you did need one of these drivers, well, you can just easily roll back to the previous version. Okay, so let's click onto install, and that will download the OS. Okay, so that's downloaded. We can see now it says that a reboot's required. Okay, so let's go to the main tab, and scroll down here, and reboot the server. Okay, so here we are rebooted. On the main page, obviously everything looks pretty much the same. You can see here I'm in 6.9.0 beta22. Let's see which kernel this version's using. And it's using a much newer Linux kernel, version 5.7.2. Okay, so now let's move across to the settings tab and look at what Docker version we're on. We're using Docker version 19.03.11. And for VM Manager here, the libvirt version is 6.4.0 and QEMU is 5.0.0. Okay, so back on settings here, if we look at the network services, we can see that we no longer have the Apple AFS service. If you remember in my shares, I had one share that used that protocol. So let's have a look at what's happened to that share then. Well, of course the share's still there, but because there's no longer any Apple filing protocol running on the server, we're going to have to swap to a different type of share. Since Apple deprecating AFS about 7 years ago, they recommend switching to an SMB share, so that's what I'm going to do with my share here. Right, okay, so let's move on. I've been talking must be, about 7 minutes now, and I haven't even shown any new features. Yeah, it's cool to see that we got new kernel versions, Docker versions, that kind of thing, but the real exciting stuff, let's look at that now. Okay, so whilst we're on the settings page, let's have a look at one of the biggest changes in this version of Unraid. If we click on display settings, at the top here we've got language. And this version of Unraid allows us to change the default language settings. Now I can hear all of you guys whose first language is English going, oh, that's not a feature I'm going to use. Well, don't worry, there's plenty of other new features that you might want to use. But for those of you who want to change the language on Unraid, here's how you do it. At the moment the only thing I can select is English, but if I go across to apps here, and then I'm going to go down to the side here where it says language, and I'm going to click onto language, and here are the available language packs available for Unraid. I'm sure this will increase as time goes on, and here I'm going to install the French language pack and click onto done. Now when I go back to settings here and display settings, now I can choose from here from English into French. Okay, so I just click onto apply. Okay, and so now you can see everything in my Unraid servers changed into French. And looking across all of the tabs on Unraid, we can see it's changed across the whole of the server. Well, as it was a long time since I did French at school, I think I better change my language back to English. Okay, so obviously to change it back, let's go to the display settings, and then I can change back to English, click on to apply, and everything's back how it was. So for all of you guys whose native language isn't English, this is a really great feature. Okay, and so if we wanted to remove any language packs that we'd downloaded, we're not going to find them in plugins here, because it's not exactly a plugin that it is. To remove the language pack, we'd go back to apps, and then back to language, and we'd remove it by clicking on the cross here. Okay, so that's the language feature on Unraid. Now let's go across and look at something else. Let's go to Tools and System Devices. Now under the PCI devices and the IOMMU groups, we can see this has changed a bit here. Now you may have seen my video a few weeks ago showing how to use the VFIO PCI configuration plugin. Well, that's all integrated into system devices now, directly into Unraid, along with a couple of little tweaks making it even better. Now I would recommend you watching that video, as it goes into a bit more detail than I'm going to go into here. So I'm just going to really concentrate on the improvements that have been done since this has been integrated into Unraid. So the first thing you can see here I've got a USB controller. You can see all of the devices that are connected, and also you can see the same on disk controllers as well. I can see to this SATA controller, all of these hard drives are attached to it. Now in the original plugin we could see all of the USB devices attached, but we couldn't see SATA devices attached, so that's a big improvement. And also here, this is my Unraid flash drive, and it's smart enough to know now that I shouldn't actually pass through this because Unraid's using it. And so this checkbox isn't selectable, so I can't isolate this USB controller because it contains my Unraid flash drive. So a good safety feature there. And looking down a bit further here, I can't pass through these two network cards because Unraid's using them. And also here you'll see it's not allowing me to pass through this USB controller here either. And that's because this is an NVMe drive that's connected to the server using a USB 3 adapter. And if we look on the main tab here, that's it there, it's being used as my cache drive, so Unraid's smart enough to know that I shouldn't isolate that because it's needed for the cache. So how System Devices is now, it allows us to easily isolate and then pass through devices that are safe to do so. So for instance, I'm going to pass through this USB controller here to a VM. I'm going to select it and then click on the bind button at the bottom. It's telling me to reboot, so let's reboot the server. Now it's rebooted, go back to Tools, System Devices, and you can see here now there's a little green mark here. That means this is bound to the VFIO PCI driver. Basically that means it's isolated from Unraid to use itself, and it can now be passed through to a VM. Okay, so let's go to the VMs tab, and if I click on Add New VM and scroll down to the bottom, and you see here under Other PCI Devices, that USB controller is now selectable to be used for pass-through. So all compatible PCIe devices now are really easy to pass through. But to see a bit more about PCIe pass-through, then please see my video that I did a couple of weeks ago, which goes in a bit more detail than I do here. Right, okay, so whilst I'm on the VMs page, if you remember earlier I said we're going to have to come back here and make a small change to this VM. So if I go here and I go to Edit, and I toggle across here to XML view, and we scroll down. Now don't worry, you don't have to edit any XML, I just want to show you something here. This part here is the network adapter. And by default, the default model type has always been VirtIO. Now this has actually changed. So switching back into template mode, all you have to do is scroll down to the bottom of the page and just click onto update. And now that will have changed the default network adapter to the new type. And I'll just show you how that's changed under the hood because you can't actually see it in the template. So now switching to XML view and again scrolling down to the network adapter, you can see here now that the default network type is now VirtIO net. So it's really easy to do, just go to all of your VMs, open the template, scroll down to the bottom and click update, and that will update your network adapter. Okay, so moving on. Well, I've saved one of the best features till last. Now you can see here I've got all of these unassigned devices. Now what can I do with these? Well actually, in this latest version of Unraid, we can set up multiple pools. You may have noticed there's a change in the screen here where it says pool devices here. Well, I'm going to stop the array. Here we are with the array stopped, and with the array stopped you can see we've got this additional button here that says add pool. Now this button doesn't allow us to add another Unraid array with a parity disk. That's something that's going to be coming in a future version of Unraid, but what we can add is another pool of disks, just like our cache pool. And these pools can be made up of multiple disks, or even a single disk if you so prefer. Multiple disk pools use the file system Btrfs, or as some people prefer to say BTRFS, and when using this file system we have the advantage that we can create redundancy that will protect us against data loss should a disk in the pool fail. Okay, so let's make a multi-disk pool now. So I'm going to click on add pool, and we need to choose how many disks are in the pool. I think I'm going to use these 3 disks here, these 1 terabyte drives. So I'm going to choose 3 here, and we need to give the pool a name. Now just one thing to note, it's quite strict with what names you can actually use. Like for example, if I put here say cache 2 and try to add that, it's not going to allow me to have that because you can't have a number at the end. But if I was to put cache 2 with an underscore afterwards, then that would allow me to use the number 2 at the end. But cache 2, that's a pretty boring name, so if I click onto here and then click the name here, I can rename it to something better. I don't know, let's call it something like deep_blue. Other things you can see here in the pool is the disk temperature warnings. By default it's 45 and 55, but using NVMe drives they tend to run a lot hotter, so if you're using NVMe's in your pool you can change that there so you don't get constant warnings. File system, we can choose the file system here. Because I've got 3 disks, I've only got 2 choices. BTRFS and BTRFS encrypted. So I'm going to click onto done here now. I've renamed the pool and I'm going to assign my disks. So I've assigned 3 disks here and I'm going to have this in a RAID 1 pool. Now RAID 1 in ButterFS is different to a standard RAID 1. In a standard RAID 1 you'll have 2 disks of the same size and it mirrors the data between the 2 of them. Now a ButterFS RAID 1 is slightly different. It isn't a mirror of the data, but RAID 1 basically has 2 copies of the data on different disks. And it distributes this data blockwise, so it means you can use hard drives of different size and using multiple numbers of disks, not just 2, like 3 that I'm using here myself. And to know how much space there's going to be available, you basically just add up the size of all of the drives and divide it by 2. After we've finished creating this pool, we'll come back and talk about different RAID levels and different sizes of the pools a little bit later on. Oh, and remember a moment ago when I couldn't create a name called Cache 2 because it had a number at the end of the name? Now I think the reason for that is because when you see the disk names here, I've got Deep Blue 2 and Deep Blue 3. Imagine if I'd named this pool Deep Blue 2, then the first disk you'd see it saying Deep Blue 2, the second disk would say Deep Blue 22, and the third disk would say Deep Blue 23, so it would look a little bit weird. Now to be honest, I'm not 100% sure if that's the real reason why you can't end a pool name with a number, but that's the only reason I can think of and it makes sense to me. Anyway, let's move on and start the array and create the pool. And okay, we can see here it says that this pool is unmountable. That's because we've got to format this now. So if we scroll down a little bit here, we can see the unmountable disks here in the pool. And if we tick this little box here and then agree to the warning, we can click onto format. And now Unraid's formatting that pool. Right, okay, so we can see that pool's now being created. And if we click on it here, under balance status here, we can see that it's a RAID 1. By default, Unraid will create a RAID 1 pool. But if we wanted to change it from RAID 1 to something else, then we can click on here, and I could change it to say RAID 0 or to RAID 5. Now there are other RAID modes as well that aren't showing up here because I don't have enough disks in this pool. So it'll only show you what options are available to you depending on how many disks you have. So if I wanted to change it to say RAID 0, I'd click onto this here, and then I'll click onto balance, and then after balance is finished running, it will be converted into that RAID mode. And now you can see the data's in RAID 0 and the metadata and system is in RAID 1. I want mine to be RAID 1, so I'm going to put it back to how it was. Okay, so there I am back in a ButterFS RAID 1. Okay, so I just want to show you a tip when planning out your ButterFS pools. If you go across to Google and type in BTRFS calc, then the first result should be this one here, at carfax.org. Click onto that and you'll see a ButterFS disk usage calculator. So put in the number of drives that you've got. I had 3, and here you put in the size of each drive, and then when you click here, I was using RAID 1. You can see here it says the replication type. I've got 2 copies of my data, so I've got redundancy. And here it says the total space for my files is 1500 megs. And there's no disk space that's unusable. If I was to swap here to RAID 0, we can see here for your replication type I've only got 1 copy of my data. I've got no parity stripes, so I've got no redundancy with this type of RAID. But what I've gained here is 2 stripes of data. So because my data's now striped, the pool's going to be faster than if it wasn't. And also with disk space I got a bit more now. I've got a total usable space of 3000 megs. And here if I go onto RAID 5, I've got 1 copy of my data, but I've got a parity stripe this time, so I've got redundancy, and the total space for my files is 2000 megs. So this is a really useful tool I think when planning out your pools. Okay, so let's go back to the main page, and I'm going to create another pool now with this single disk that I've got here. So I'm going to stop the array, and I'm going to add another pool. This one I'm just going to call SSD. I only want 1 slot. Now you might think, what's the point in having just 1 drive in a pool? What's the difference between just having it as a standard unassigned drive and formatting it here and using it as an unassigned disk? Well, there is an advantage. I'm going to show you what that is now. So let's create this. For file system, because it's only 1 disk, I've got a bit more choice. I'm going to use XFS and click apply and done. Now let's start up the array again and format the drive. Okay, so that's formatted now. So what can I do with this single disk in the pool that I couldn't do if it was an unassigned disk? Well, if we go to my shares here, and for instance I've got a share here called Nextcloud, what I can do is I can use the cache pool for new files and directories. I'm going to set that to yes. And now I've got the option here to select the cache pool which is used for the new files. So I'm going to put it on SSD. So that's going to be a fast drive that it's going to. And click apply and done. Okay, so now on my Nextcloud share, all new files are going to go onto that SSD cache pool that I've just made. So here, this one called backups here. If I go onto that and I put use cache pool for new files as well. I could set this now to prefer. So all new files will go here and stay there. And selecting my cache pool, I can choose deep blue. That's the pool that's got redundancy in the RAID 1. And click apply. So now here we can see, app data is using the cache. Backups is using deep blue, and my Nextcloud share is using the SSD. Now what I think would be really cool is if we were able to go to settings, scheduler, and here where we see mover settings, to be able to individually set different mover settings for each different pool that there is on the server. So this isn't a part of Unraid at the moment, so why am I mentioning it? Well, at the moment 6.9 is still in beta, so we may well see extra features in the stable version when that ships. So basically, when you're running a beta version, yes, of course there's a risk that there might be some bugs that haven't been seen yet. But if you're one of the people who are trying it out, and you can think of something that might help improve the system, then you can go to the forums and you can open a feature request there, like I've just done here. So if enough other people agree with you, and the devs do too, then you may well see your request becoming a reality. Okay, so I think that really brings us to the end of the video. Now, I really hope you enjoyed my overview of Unraid 6.9. I really enjoyed making the video and want to give a big thanks to all the Limetech guys who have really pulled out all the stops this time and brought us an absolutely awesome release. And also I want to thank all of you guys out there, all of my patrons and supporters, without whom I wouldn't be able to make these videos. Thank you very much guys for all of your support. Anyway guys, it's time for me to go now, but whatever you're up to for the rest of the day, I hope it's good and I'll catch you in the next video.